You're holding it wrong. That's a SEAL rifle, isn't it? But they didn't teach you how to properly run a breaching shotgun in whatever glorified swim class you came from, Lieutenant. The crowd laughed. It was a low, nervous rumble of sound, the kind that subordinates make when an officer they fear makes a joke at someone else's expense. The man speaking was Marine Captain Thorne, a monolith of muscle and regulations whose voice seemed to occupy more space than his body. He stood with his arms crossed, a caricature of authority, his jaw set in a permanent sneer of disapproval. Before him, a woman whose fatigues bore no name or rank insignia simply continued her task. She didn't flinch. She didn't look up. Her hands, surprisingly steady and scarred, moved with a quiet, practiced economy, racking the slide on the M1014 shotgun he had just thrust at her. The sound was a clean, metallic schlick-schlack that cut through the murmuring. But when the gunnery sergeant major, standing off to the side, a man whose face was a roadmap of forgotten conflicts, saw her stance, the way her feet were perfectly balanced, the way her shoulders stayed square and relaxed, the way her eyes scanned the entry point of the kill house without truly focusing on any single point, he saw something else entirely. He saw a ghost. If you believe that true strength doesn't need to announce itself, type competence below. The air in the Mojave hung thick and heavy, a blanket of shimmering heat that distorted the distant mountains into watery apparitions. Here, at the Marine Corps' most advanced urban warfare training center, the only currency that mattered was performance. The smell of sun-baked concrete, cordite, and nervous sweat was the local perfume. Today's exercise was a Joint Forces CQC evaluation, a high-stress test designed to certify breachers for a new inter-service task force. Captain Thorne, as the lead instructor for the facility, considered himself the ultimate gatekeeper. He believed in the Marine way, a doctrine of overwhelming force, loud commands, and aggressive, disciplined violence. He saw the world in a rigid hierarchy, and this Navy officer, this woman who had shown up with a quiet demeanor and a high-end, customized M4 that looked more like a surgeon's tool than a grunt's weapon, deeply offended his sense of order. He saw not a fellow officer. He saw an outsider. He saw a product of the Navy's supposedly softer culture. He saw weakness. His prejudice was a shield, protecting a brittle ego that had never been truly tested outside the controlled chaos of training environments. He had risen through the ranks on the strength of his adherence to doctrine and his booming voice, mistaking compliance for respect and procedure for mastery. The woman before him was an anomaly he could not compute. Her silence was not submissive. It felt analytical. Her calm was not timid. It felt predatory. And so, he chose the only tool he had to reassert control: public humiliation. He had taken her finely tuned rifle from her, tossing it carelessly onto a gear table, and replaced it with a standard-issue breacher shotgun. On this range, he had bellowed, for the benefit of the assembled Marines and a handful of Army Rangers, we use tools of war, not expensive toys. Let's see if you can handle a real weapon. He expected a protest, a flustered explanation of her qualifications, perhaps an appeal to her rank. He received nothing, only the cold, methodical sound of her checking the weapon, her focus absolute, her world shrinking to the simple mechanics of the tool in her hands. The onlookers shifted uncomfortably. They had all been on the receiving end of Thorne's tirades, but this felt different. The woman's lack of reaction was creating a vacuum, a pocket of intense pressure that Thorne seemed compelled to fill with more and more noise. He was performing for an audience that was slowly beginning to watch her instead of him. The humiliation was designed to be a spectacle, a lesson in institutional dominance. Captain Thorne saw her as a representative of everything he disdained about other branches, particularly the enigmatic and, in his view, undisciplined world of naval special warfare. He imagined them as beach-running prima donnas with bloated budgets and an undeserved reputation. This quiet officer, with her unassuming build and the utter absence of bravado, was the perfect target to prove his point. The objective is simple, Lieutenant, he said, his voice dripping with condescending patience, as if explaining the rules to a child. The door is reinforced steel. You have 2 breaching rounds. Place your shot, make entry, and neutralize the 3 hostile targets inside. The hostage is in the back left corner. Do not, and I repeat, do not shoot the hostage. Think you can remember all that? He gestured vaguely at the formidable door of the kill house, a structure known affectionately as the Blender. It was a maze of concrete and steel designed to simulate the most challenging close-quarters battle scenarios imaginable. The targets within were reactive, programmed to present lethal threats from unpredictable angles. The hostage was a hyper-realistic mannequin wired to scream and set off a blaring failure alarm if so much as grazed. It was a test that chewed up and spit out even seasoned infantrymen. The woman gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Her focus remained on the shotgun. She wasn't just holding it, she was learning it. Her fingers traced the lines of the receiver, felt the balance, tested the tension of the trigger. It was a rapid, tactile assessment, a conversation between warrior and weapon conducted in a language of pure kinesthetics. Thorn scoffed, a loud, theatrical sound. No questions? No clever SEAL tricks you want to show us? Just gonna go in there and wing it. He turned to the young Marines watching, a smirk plastered on his face. See this? This is overconfidence. This is what happens when you spend too much time on a boat and not enough time on the ground. Remember this lesson, Marines. Arrogance precedes failure, but Gunnery Sergeant Major Vance saw something entirely different. He wasn't looking at her confidence. He was looking at her hands. He saw the practiced, fluid motion as she loaded the two breaching rounds, then seamlessly followed them with a tube of 0-0 buckshot. He saw the way she didn't waste a single movement, her actions stripped of all hesitation. It was a level of efficiency that couldn't be taught on a conventional range. It had to be forged, hammered into muscle memory by thousands of hours of life-or-death repetition. He saw the way she canted the weapon, checking the chamber for the third time, not out of uncertainty, but out of an ingrained ritual of absolute certainty. He had seen hands like that once before, years ago, in a dusty corner of Afghanistan, on a man who had walked out of the mountains alone after his entire team had been wiped out. They were the hands of a survivor, a professional who had transcended the need for words. The captain, blinded by his own monologue, missed it all. He was too busy narrating the failure he was certain was about to unfold. He was constructing the story of the arrogant SEAL who was humbled by the raw, practical reality of Marine CQC. He was polishing the punchline before the joke had even been told. The woman, whose name no one there even knew, took a single, deep, calming breath. The sound of it was lost in the vast, indifferent heat of the desert. She then turned her gaze to the door of the Blender, her expression unreadable, her presence a silent, profound counterpoint to the captain's storm of empty words. The stage was set. The injustice was palpable. The air crackled with anticipation, not for her failure, but for the inevitable, brutal collision of loud assumption and quiet, devastating truth. The signal was given. A sharp, singular blast from an air horn that echoed off the concrete walls of the training complex. For a moment, nothing happened. The woman, whom Thorn had derided for her supposed hesitation, remained perfectly still. It wasn't a pause of fear or indecision. It was a hunter's pause, a moment of absolute stillness before the explosion of precise, controlled violence. She was absorbing the environment, letting the last of Thorn's useless words fade from the air, allowing her world to narrow to the door, the weapon, and the mission. Then she moved. It wasn't a run. It was a glide. A low, powerful flow of motion that consumed the 10 yards to the door in a heartbeat. Her body remained a stable, firing platform, the shotgun held at a low ready, its muzzle unwavering. Thorn, watching from the control tower's monitor, leaned into his microphone, his voice booming over the facility's loudspeakers. A little slow on the uptake, Lieutenant. The enemy won't wait for you to compose yourself. His words were meant to rattle her, to cement his narrative of her incompetence. They had no effect. She was already deaf to him, operating in a space beyond his reach. She reached the door. Her first shot was a thunderclap. It wasn't placed randomly on the lock mechanism as most trainees did. It was aimed with surgical precision at the upper hinge. The slug struck with the force of a battering ram, vaporizing the steel pins. The second shot, fired less than a half-second later, struck the lower hinge with identical, devastating accuracy. This was not the standard procedure. The standard procedure was 2 shots near the handle to break the lock. What she had just done was something else entirely. A high-risk, high-reward technique used to blow the entire door inward, creating a massive, disorienting breach and a momentary shield. The heavy steel door, its structural integrity annihilated, blasted inward off its frame and crashed to the floor with a deafening clang that reverberated through the entire structure. For the briefest of moments, the thick dust and smoke kicked up by the breach obscured the entryway. From the control tower, it was a cloud of chaos. But she was already through it. She didn't charge in blindly. She used the door as a ramp, sliding over it in a low crouch, weapon up, acquiring her first target before her boots had even fully settled on the concrete floor. The first hostile, a pop-up target positioned to ambush the standard entry point, was met with a controlled pair of 0-0 buckshot rounds to the center mass. The target shuddered and dropped. The sound of her shotgun was different inside the concrete room, a deep concussive roar. She flowed left, hugging the wall, her movements liquid and silent. A second target sprang from behind a stack of barrels. She didn't pivot. She simply rotated her torso, the shotgun seeming to move of its own accord, and fired once. Another kill. The entire sequence, breach, entry, 2 targets down, had taken less than 3 seconds. In the control tower, a stunned silence had fallen. The young Marines who had been snickering just moments before now stood with their mouths agape, their eyes glued to the monitors displaying multiple camera angles from inside the blender. They were witnessing a level of speed and efficiency they had never seen before. Captain Thorne stood frozen, his hand still on the microphone switch, his next sarcastic comment dead in his throat. What he was seeing didn't compute. It defied the doctrine he preached. It was too fast, too fluid, too quiet. There was no shouting, no wasted motion, just a silent, lethal ballet of violence. He felt a cold knot of dread begin to form in his stomach. This was not the clumsy failure he had so confidently predicted. This was something else. This was mastery. Inside the blender, the woman moved through the space, not like a soldier clearing a room, but like an apex predator navigating its own territory. The third hostile target was the most difficult. A swiveling mannequin programmed to appear for only 15 seconds from behind the hostage, presenting a shot that required instantaneous target discrimination and terrifying precision. It was the run killer, the element designed to induce failure and teach the brutal consequences of a single mistake. As she rounded the final interior wall, the mechanism activated. The hostile target swung out, its plastic rifle aimed directly at her. The hostage mannequin, with its wide, painted-on eyes, was directly in the line of fire. There was no time to aim in the traditional sense. There was only time to react, to trust the thousands of hours of training that had fused weapon and warrior into a single, instinctive entity. Her shotgun roared a third time. On the monitor, the effect was breathtaking. The tight cluster of 9 lead pellets struck the hostile target squarely in the designated head area, bypassing the hostage by a mere whisper of air. The hostile target snapped back into its housing. The hostage remained untouched. The failure alarm remained silent. A collective gasp went through the control room. One of the young Army Rangers let out a low whistle. Jesus Christ, he muttered to the man next to him. Did you see that shot? The run was over. The woman stood in the center of the room, shotgun now held in a relaxed but ready position, her chest rising and falling in a slow, controlled rhythm. She was scanning the room, checking the corners again, ensuring the environment was secure out of pure, unbreakable habit. The only sounds were the faint hum of the ventilation system and the distant, shocked silence of the men watching her. The entire evolution, from the horn blast to the final scan, had taken 114 seconds. The facility record, held by a decorated MARSOC team leader, was 23 seconds. She hadn't just beaten the record, she had obliterated it. She had redefined what was considered possible within those walls. In the control tower, the atmosphere was thick with disbelief. Captain Thorne stared at the main screen, his face pale. The image of that final, impossible shot was burned into his retinas. The sheer, unadulterated skill was undeniable, a physical fact that shattered his carefully constructed reality. The woman on the screen was not the incompetent paper pusher he had imagined. She was a weapon. His arrogance, once a booming, unshakable fortress, had been reduced to rubble by a demonstration of quiet, irrefutable competence. He fumbled for the microphone, his mind blank. What could he possibly say? His authority had evaporated. His expertise had been exposed as a hollow sham. He had postured and pronounced, and she had simply performed. The silence stretched, becoming more damning with every passing second. Finally, a voice cut through the tension in the control room. It wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of decades of earned respect. "Captain," said Gunnery Sergeant Major Vance, his eyes still fixed on the monitor. "I suggest you shut your mouth." Vance didn't wait for a reply. He turned and walked out of the control tower, his expression grim and determined. He was heading for the kill house. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he was about to meet someone who was not just a soldier, but a living piece of history. The legend was walking among them, and only he had been wise enough to suspect it. The rest of them, especially Thorne, were about to receive an education that no manual or doctrine could ever provide. The lesson was simple. You do not judge a storm by the quiet of its eye. Gunnery Sergeant Major Elias Vance moved with the deliberate, unhurried pace of a man who had seen everything war had to offer and had survived it all. His boots crunched on the gravel as he approached the exit of the blender, his mind racing. The technique she used on the door, the split-second target discrimination, the impossible speed, it was all adding up to a conclusion that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. He had heard stories, whispers passed in hushed tones in forward operating bases and classified briefing rooms. Tales of a Tier 1 unit so secretive that its operators were ghosts, their accomplishments buried under layers of black ink and official denial. They were the scalpel, the assets used when failure was not an option and discovery meant catastrophe. He reached the exit just as the woman stepped out into the blinding desert sun. She blinked once, her eyes adjusting. She methodically began to clear the shotgun, her movements as precise and unthinking as breathing. She ejected the spent shells, her fingers moving with a practiced grace, and placed the weapon on the designated clearing barrel. She looked up and saw Vance standing there, watching her. Her expression remained neutral, a mask of professional calm. "Ma'am," Vance said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He had intentionally used the term of respect, a subtle but significant shift from the dismissive Lieutenant Thorne had been using. He didn't wait for her to respond. He simply pointed to the small, nondescript patch on her sleeve, partially obscured by a strap from her plate carrier. It was a simple black square with a single, stylized red symbol in the center. It was a patch he had seen only once before in a file so heavily redacted that it was mostly black lines. "Mind if I ask what that is?" he asked, though he already knew. The woman's gaze followed his finger. She looked at the patch, then back at him. For the first time, a flicker of something crossed her face. Not emotion, but a kind of professional assessment. She was evaluating him, deciding what she was and was not allowed to say. "It's just a unit insignia, Gunny," she said. Her voice was calm and even, betraying nothing. Vance nodded slowly. "Right, a unit insignia." He pulled out a small, ruggedized military tablet from his cargo pocket, his thumb moving across the screen with practiced ease. He accessed the day's training roster, a list of names and service numbers. He found her entry, Rostova, M., Lieutenant Commander, U.S. It was sparse, almost intentionally vague. But next to her name was a small, encrypted link to her full service record, accessible only to personnel with the highest level of security clearance. As a senior enlisted advisor for a major training command, Vance had that clearance. His thumb hovered over the link. He looked from the tablet back to her. "With your permission, Commander," he said, his tone now devoid of any ambiguity. It was pure, formal respect. She gave another one of her small, almost imperceptible nods. It was all the permission he needed. He tapped the screen. The file opened after a series of security protocols, and the screen lit up with a history that made the breath catch in his throat. It was a litany of quiet heroism, a curriculum vitae written in blood and shadow. The words on the screen were stark, stripped of all fanfare, yet they painted a portrait of a warrior who existed on a plane far beyond the comprehension of men like Captain Thorne. Vance read them aloud, not for her benefit, But for the benefit of Thorne and the other instructors who had now gathered a short distance away, drawn by the gravity of the unfolding scene. His voice was steady, authoritative, each word landing like a hammer blow. Name, Maya Rostova. Rank, Lieutenant Commander. United States Navy. He paused, letting the rank settle in. She outranked Thorne. Unit, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. A murmur went through the assembled men. DevGru, the official, unclassified name for the unit more commonly known to the world by its former name. SEAL Team 6. The Legends. The Ghosts. Combat Deploiement, 12. Classified locations. Vance's eyes widened slightly. 12. It was a staggering number. Awards and decorations, he continued, his voice taking on a tone of reverence. Navy Cross, the second highest award for valor in the nation. It was an award for extraordinary heroism, an act of courage so profound it stood as an example to all. Silver Star with 2 oak leaf clusters, 3 separate acts of gallantry in action. Bronze Star with V4 Valor, for oak leaf clusters, 5 instances of heroic service in a combat zone. Purple Heart, 3 oak leaf clusters, wounded in action 4 separate times. The list went on, a cascade of commendations and medals that represented a lifetime of service at the sharpest edge of the spear. Special qualifications, Vance read, his voice dropping lower. Master Breacher, Advanced Special Operations Techniques. Lead Instructor, Tier 1 Close Quarters Combat School. He looked up from the tablet, his eyes locking with Thorne's. The captain's face was ashen. The blood had drained from it, replaced by a sickly pallor of shame and dawning horror. The woman he had insulted, the officer he had publicly humiliated and accused of incompetence in the very skill she taught at the highest level in the world, was a living legend. He had tried to teach a master class to the master. Vance lowered the tablet. He looked back at Commander Rostova, who stood with the patient stillness of a mountain. He saw her not as a woman, not as a Navy officer, but as a repository of immense sacrifice and skill. He saw the weight of the names and faces of fallen comrades she carried in her silence. He understood now that her quiet was not a weakness. It was a fortress built to contain experiences that would break lesser men. He took a slow, deliberate step forward. He drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight. In a voice that was crisp and clear and echoed in the sudden, profound silence of the desert, he called out the formal greeting of respect. Commander Rostova. Then he executed the sharpest, most meaningful hand salute of his long and storied career. It was not a gesture from a senior enlisted man to an officer. It was a salute from one warrior to another, an acknowledgement of greatness that transcended rank, branch, or gender. It was an act of profound, institutional validation. It was an apology, and in that single, silent gesture, order was restored. The story of what happened at the blender spread through the base like a shockwave. It traveled not through official channels, but through the military's far more efficient grapevine. The whispers in the Chow Hall line, the late-night bull sessions in the barracks, the encrypted text messages that flew between fire teams. It became an instant legend, a piece of institutional folklore passed from grizzled veterans to wide-eyed recruits. The narrative was always the same. It started with the arrogant Marine captain, his voice full of bluster and certainty. It detailed his condescending insults, his theatrical display of superiority. And then, it pivoted to the quiet Navy commander, the ghost who had answered his noise not with words, but with a display of such breathtaking skill that it had rendered everyone speechless. The story was told and retold, each telling adding a new layer of mythic detail. Her time in the kill house, already an impossible 114 seconds, was rounded down to 10, then to 8. The final shot on a hostage target was said to have been made while she was airborne, a mid-air pirouette of lethal grace. The details didn't matter. What mattered was the core truth of the event, the triumph of demonstrated competence over loud-mouthed assumption. The legend became a teaching tool. It was a cautionary tale about the dangers of prejudice, a powerful reminder that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one you notice the least. For Captain Thorne, the event was not a legend. It was a reckoning. The public, silent rebuke from Gunnery Sergeant Major Vance. followed by the revelation of Commander Rostova's identity, had shattered his professional world. He spent the next 48 hours in a state of self-imposed isolation, replaying the event in his mind. He saw his own smug face on the monitor, heard his own condescending words echoing in the empty space of his quarters. The shame was a physical weight, a crushing burden of his own making. He had not just been wrong, he had been a fool. He had violated the very principles of leadership and respect he claimed to uphold. His arrogance had made him blind, and his blindness had led him to commit an act of profound professional malpractice. He had disrespected not just an officer, but a warrior of a caliber he could barely comprehend. He knew what he had to do. It was the hardest thing he would ever have to do in his career, harder than any physical test or tactical problem. He had to face her. He had to apologize. He found her the next day, not in an office, but on the small arms range, quietly mentoring a group of young Marines who were struggling with their pistol marksmanship. She wasn't lecturing them. She was showing them, adjusting a grip here, correcting a stance there, her voice low and calm, her instructions simple and direct. The Marines were listening with a rapt attention they never afforded him. They were drawn to her quiet authority, a stark contrast to his loud dominance. Thorn waited until she was finished, his heart pounding in his chest. He approached her as she was cleaning her sidearm, the familiar, methodical movements a small island of calm in his sea of turmoil. "Commander," he said. The word felt foreign and inadequate on his tongue. She looked up, her expression unreadable. She simply waited. Her silence was a canvas, and he knew he had to fill it with something honest, something real. I came to apologize," he stammered, the words catching in his throat. "Why, I did yesterday, in front of my men. There was no excuse. It was unprofessional. It was ignorant, and it was disrespectful. I misjudged you, completely and totally. I am sorry." He stood there, his fists clenched at his sides, bracing for a reprimand, a lecture, or worse, a dismissal. He had offered his apology. The next move was hers. Commander Rostova paused her work. She looked at him, her gaze direct and analytical. It felt as though she were looking right through his rank, through his uniform, and into the core of his character. She was assessing his sincerity. After a long moment, she gave a single, slow nod. "Your apology is accepted, Captain," she said. Her voice was even, without a trace of anger or triumph. Then she did something he never expected. She gestured to the pistol in her hands. "The problem your Marines are having," she began, her tone shifting from personal to professional, "is that they're anticipating the recoil. They're flinching before the shot breaks. You're teaching them to fight the weapon. You need to teach them to guide it. Let the weapon do the work. Focus on the front sight and a smooth trigger press. Everything else is just noise." She wasn't just accepting his apology. She was offering him a piece of her philosophy. She was teaching him. She was showing him that true leadership wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room, but about being the most competent and using that competence to elevate others. The lesson was profound. It was a gift of grace he knew he didn't deserve. In that moment, Thorn's transformation began. He understood that his entire approach to leadership had been flawed. He had been building followers who feared him, not leaders who respected him. Commander Rostova, with her quiet discipline and devastating skill, had shown him a better way. The story of their interaction on the range also spread, but this part of the legend was told with a different tone, one of respect for a man who was willing to admit his error and learn from it. Thorn started changing. He spoke less and listened more. He replaced sarcasm with genuine instruction. He began to look for the quiet competence in his Marines, not just the loud confidence. A photograph of Commander Rostova, a grainy still from the control room monitor at the exact moment she fired the final shot in the blender, was anonymously pinned to the main bulletin board in the instructor's ready room. No one knew who put it there, but no one dared take it down. It became a silent, permanent reminder. Underneath it, someone had scrawled 2 words: watch, learn. Weeks turned into months. Commander Rostova completed her advisory tour at the facility and departed as quietly as she had arrived, leaving behind nothing but a shattered range record and a profound, lasting impact on the culture of the base. The legend of her run through the blender, now referred to as the Rostova Breach, became a permanent part of the training curriculum. New instructors were told the story on their first day, not to gossip, but to instill a core principle. Never mistake quiet for weakness. The story served as an institutional antibody against the disease of arrogance. It forced a generation of Marine leaders to look beyond the surface, to value skill over swagger, and to understand that the most effective warriors often carry the lightest egos. Captain Thorne's career took a different path. He was no longer the loud, domineering gatekeeper. The humbling he received had cracked open his rigid worldview, allowing for genuine growth. He became one of the most respected instructors at the facility, known for his patience, his humility, and his uncanny ability to identify and nurture talent in the quietest, most unassuming Marines. He often used his own story as a teaching tool. He would stand before a new group of lieutenants, fresh from officer training and full of unearned confidence, and he would tell them about the day he tried to lecture a ghost. "I was so sure I was right," he would say, his voice steady and sincere. "I had the rank, I had the title, I knew the regulations backward and forward. My assumptions were my armor." And in the space of 114 seconds, a true professional shattered that armor with nothing but pure, undeniable competence. She never raised her voice. She never corrected me. She simply did her job at a level I didn't know existed. The greatest lesson you will ever learn out here is that respect is not in the insignia you wear on your collar. It's in the skill you carry in your hands. Earn it every single day. The legacy of Maya Rostova was not a plaque on a wall or a name in a record book. It was in the changed behavior of a captain, in the improved marksmanship of a young corporal, in the culture of quiet professionalism that began to permeate the training command. It was a living legacy, carried forward in the actions and attitudes of those she had influenced, most of whom had never even learned her name. Her silence had left an echo that was louder and more enduring than any shouted command. She had proven that true strength isn't about the noise you make, but about the impact you leave behind. It's about the standards you set and the competence you embody. She was a testament to the fact that in a world full of loud voices demanding attention, the quiet professional, the one focused only on the mission, is the one who truly changes the world. Years later, a newly promoted Major Thorne would be reviewing the files of incoming candidates for a special joint task force. He came across a file with a familiar name, Rostova. Her photo was the same, her expression just as unreadable. Her list of accomplishments had grown even longer, her deployments more numerous. He paused, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. He took out a red pen, and on the top of her file, he wrote a single, bold word. Approved. Then he added a short note for the task force commander, a man he knew well. General, the note read, "Don't let her quiet demeanor fool you. You're getting the best there is. Stay out of her way and let her work. You will not be disappointed." The enduring truth revealed that day in the Mojave was not simply that a woman could be a superior warrior, or that a Navy SEAL could outshoot a Marine. The lesson was far more fundamental, a principle that transcends uniforms and battlefields. It is the universal law that competence is its own authority. It needs no introduction, no validation from the insecure, no permission from the arrogant. It simply is. Commander Rostova's actions were a physical manifestation of this law. She did not argue with Captain Thorne's flawed assumptions, because to do so would be to grant them a legitimacy they did not deserve. An argument would have been a debate between two opinions. Her performance was a statement of fact, and facts are not subject to debate. They are simply to be witnessed and acknowledged. Her legacy became a quiet current running beneath the surface of the institution. It manifested in instructors who started asking questions instead of giving lectures. It showed up in senior NCOs who would take a silent, unassuming soldier aside and spend extra hours with him on the range, recognizing a flicker of potential that others might have missed. The Rostova breach taught them to look for the signature of excellence not in the volume of a voice, but in the steadiness of a hand, in the focus of an eye, in the economy of motion. It taught them that true mastery is often cloaked in humility. For those who have reached the pinnacle of their craft have nothing left to prove. They are not competing with others. They are competing with the limits of human potential itself. They are pushing the boundaries of what is possible. And that sacred work is done in the quiet spaces, far from the applause or condemnation of the crowd. The story reminds us that our assumptions are the most dangerous enemy we will ever face. They build walls around our understanding, blinding us to the truth that is right in front of us. Captain Thorne did not see a highly decorated special operator. He saw a gender in a branch of service, and he projected his own biases onto her. He built a prison of prejudice in his mind, and it took an act of overwhelming skill to tear it down. The ultimate power of Rostova's example is that she did not seek to tear him down. She sought only to complete her mission. The destruction of his arrogance was merely a collateral benefit of her unwavering focus on the task at hand. She did not act for vengeance or for vindication. She acted out of duty, out of a lifetime of discipline. Her triumph was not over him. It was a triumph of her own principles. That is the final, most inspirational lesson. Do not waste your energy fighting the opinions of the ignorant. Instead, invest that energy in honing your craft to such a degree of excellence that your actions become the only argument necessary. Let your competence be the thunder that silences the empty noise. True legacy isn't what you say about yourself. It's what others whisper about your work long after you are gone. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where professional skill defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.